Today I'm talking to John Rees, who's very active in the Stop the War coalition. Their position is that the British military should not have got involved in intervention in Libya. John Rees, thank you very much for talking to RT. Now, the government says that the airstrikes prevented a massacre in Benghazi. Why are you right and they're wrong?
Well, I think the longer-term effects would be even worse than the effects might have been on Benghazi, but I don't actually accept the government's argument about Benghazi either. If you look at the Guardian report on the day before the airstrikes took place from Benghazi, it's clear that the rebels in Benghazi stopped Gaddafi's advance before he got beyond the suburbs, and I think it would have been impossible for a force of some maybe tens of thousands of soldiers to have taken a city of 1 million people. So I don't accept that that was a sufficient justification for the war in the first place. I also think there is some evidence, again reported in the Guardian newspaper, that Gaddafi actually moved into Benghazi to take shelter from possible air attacks. So far from producing the effect that the government said it would, it produced the opposite effect.
So your position is just stand back, leave well alone and let them sort themselves out?
Well, I certainly think that when a revolution takes place in the country, it's the business of the people in that country to conduct the revolution. And my point about the Western intervention would be this: I don't think that they did intervene in order to assist a revolutionary process. I think they intervened in order to get control of a revolutionary process, and we begin to see now in the weeks since the Western intervention that there are pro-Western figures emerging as the dominant figures within the Benghazi administration. Often they're the same people who only yesterday were in the Gaddafi regime, who were dealing very happily with the West for the last decade. So I think that they're shaping and moulding the Benghazi uprising in ways which are compatible with the interests of the Western powers, whereas the original rebellion certainly wasn't.
What damage do you think this type of Western involvement does to a regional uprising? How does it corrupt the original purpose of it?
Well, I think it's very, very clear in the Libyan case that there are people now coming to the fore who were trained in the West, have links with the West, have links with the Western security services, who wouldn't have come to the top had the West not intervened. There was a democratic structure in Benghazi. The Transitional National Council was a body represented by 20 local councils beneath it. But when the Western powers intervene, the people who become selected, who become the leadership of it, are people who have the ear of the West. Therefore, the whole democratic process of representing the Libyan people becomes distorted. They're the people who now have the ear of the West, who are the authorities, the people who can broker the deals over military intervention, the people that can broker the deal that's taking place with Qatar about the sale of oil. The whole principle of a popular democratic revolution becomes corroded, corrupted and demeaned by the intervention of the Western powers.
And what did you experience in the region? What's your feeling about the sort of sentiment, the mood that prevails on the streets now?
I think there's a very, very powerful impulse, both to have a democratic society, but also I think the roots of the revolutions are to do with a rejection of the neoliberal economics, which, let's face it, the Mubarak dictatorship was very strongly associated with a neoliberal economic policy, with privatising state industry, and I think a lot of the fire in the engine of the Egyptian revolution was to do with a rejection of that, and we can see by the massive strike wave that's taken place, actually in the 2 days before Mubarak fell, but massively expanded since then, that this is a very, very big issue for many millions of Egyptians. We know that the UGTT, the union in Tunisia, was at the heart of the revolution which overthrew Ben Ali, and we know that economic questions were central to the beginning of that revolution, and I believe will be central to the future of it as well. So democracy, yes, but a rejection of neoliberalism, and also I think a very deep dissatisfaction with the alliance between the dictators in the region and the Western powers and the State of Israel. So I think that in all three registers, political democracy, economic challenge to neoliberalism, challenge to the imperial structure of the region, we're going to see very, very profound developments.
And you mentioned Iraq, and a lot of people are comparing this to Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is a bit different, though, isn't it? I mean, after all, these airstrikes do support what was essentially initially a popular uprising.
Yes, but as I say, it was an intervention not to save a revolution, but to subvert a revolution, and it's as well here as also to remember an important element of the history in Iraq, especially actually from the first Gulf War, because there, when the no-fly zones were imposed on northern and southern Iraq, just after the coalition had defeated Saddam Hussein, they allowed Saddam Hussein's helicopters to fly under the cover of the no-fly zone to put down the rising of the Marsh Arabs in the south. It's not inconceivable, actually, that if they come to a ceasefire, if they come to some kind of settlement, they will allow Gaddafi to put down the remnants of a rebellion here as well. So the fact that we're fighting Gaddafi now doesn't preclude, as it didn't in Iraq, the fact that a no-fly zone might well be used against the rebels in the future.
And could this turn into another Iraq and Afghanistan? People are warning that it could, among them the Turkish Prime Minister. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any such thing anymore as a sort of quick and clean in-and-out operation.
Well, the difficulty is here that the coalition forces are actually jammed up by the political developments surrounding this intervention. They're obviously very, very concerned about a full-scale military intervention on the ground. So in that sense, I think the anti-war opinion, both here and in the United States, has prevented a full-scale invasion so far. But, as any military analyst will tell you, you can't win a ground war simply with air power. And they aren't obviously winning it, and that's why there's all this talk about stalemate. Now, the stalemate is very hard to resolve without the deployment of ground troops. I sincerely hope that that doesn't happen. It would be a massive deterioration of the situation if that were to be the case. But if it doesn't happen, then I think we are looking at a very, very messy situation, which may lead to the partition of Libya, may lead to a prolonged civil war, actually. If the West had kept out, funnily enough, it might have been over sooner.
Ahead of the war in Iraq, there was a huge public outcry, hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets demonstrating against it, and public opinion is increasingly against this war in Libya. But do you think that the main thing that the government has learnt from Iraq is how to sell a war to the public?
No, I think it's learnt not to commit itself to a war very quickly. You see, I mean, it was obvious that there was going to be an absolutely massive ground invasion. I mean, apart from anything else, it came after the invasion of Afghanistan, so it was absolutely clear what was going to happen. I think the public opinion is actually calibrated to the degree of military involvement at the moment, and the fact that the government is avoiding a ground war, I think, is reflected in the opinion polls, that people are against what's happening, but they don't see it on the same scale as the Iraq war, which indeed it isn't yet. I think if there were any sign that there was going to be a serious deployment of ground troops in Libya, you would have an absolutely massive response, partly as we can see from the opinion polls. There is a majority against the intervention, but there are a very large number of don't knows. That would alter very, very quickly if there were talk of a ground war, I think.
What role do you think the media plays in legitimising an intervention like this?
I think the main difficulty with the media is that it doesn't have a sense of history. Not even over a very short period, actually. And so it's trapped within what happens today. But the trouble is you can never understand what happens today unless you understand what happened yesterday, in the previous week, in the previous year, in the previous decade. And so it's the struggle to recall exactly those points. And of course, they've armed him to the tune of billions of pounds. Practically every Western corporation involved in oil is in Libya. He was feted in the academic institutions and others in this country. And this is very, very important to recall if we want to have some historical sense about what we might be doing in the region.
And finally and briefly, where do you see this going in the short to medium term?
Very difficult to tell. I think it is grinding down to a stalemate. It's very difficult to see how Gaddafi could actually hold down the entire population of the east of the country, and it's also very difficult to see how, under current circumstances, the rebels in Benghazi can take Tripoli. And I don't believe that the Western intervention will fundamentally resolve this. In a way, what it's doing is it's kind of institutionalising and making permanent a situation of civil conflict rather than resolving it. So I hope that there comes a point where the rebellion in Benghazi says, actually, this Western intervention hasn't helped us. It hasn't done what we thought it would do. It hasn't saved civilian lives. It's actually causing civilian casualties. It's actually using weaponry which will cause injury and ill health for generations to come, and it hasn't decisively altered the balance against Gaddafi. We would be better, perhaps they might begin to think, of finding the resources within the revolution itself which might find it successful. That would be a big turnaround. It would mean chucking out all the people now who are in the leadership of the Benghazi rebellion, who are pro-Western, who are old Gaddafi hands, who've very long links with the West. And that's quite hard to imagine as well. So I think the Western intervention has made an incredible mess, which will last for a long time in Libya.
John Rees, thank you very much.